in St Andrews today.
That's right.
Can you tell me any stories of St Andrews relating to the Civil War era?
Yes, George Hughes was the vicar here during that period. He was very good for the town. He was a Puritan vicar, but at the restoration of Charles II, he was arrested and sent as a prisoner to Drake's Island, St Nicholas's Island, with his son Obadiah, where they remained until George Hughes died there. Another little story is during the Civil War, while the town was under siege, the officers and parishioners came in for a service, officers leaving their swords and weapons outside or in the doorway. They settled down for the sermon. All of a sudden, they heard shouting, people shouting outside to arm yourselves, arm yourselves. And that, to them, to soldiers, meant the town line had been attacked and was probably broken, and they needed to get their weapons. So they jumped out of their seats, ran outside, grabbing their weapons as they went, only to find a group of children playing at war and fighting amongst themselves. These children probably came from the Orphans' Aid, or poor portion opposite St Andrews, because it was right outside here. That's a little story that was perpetrated during the English Civil War in Plymouth. Also, there were a lot of priests in Plymouth during the war years, because as the rest of Devon was taken over by the Royalists, they congregated in Plymouth. It was the only town left at one stage under Roundhead control. And a lot of these priests and ministers went out to the trenches and served the soldiers, gave them a bit of peace, these men, because there were a lot of Puritan ministers in Plymouth, more than there needed to be. There was only 2 churches in Plymouth and a few chapels, but there were dozens of these men. I have a list of these names that were here during the Civil War. And the church bells, after the Freedom Fields battle, the Sabbath day fight, they rang out every year to celebrate the victory. So there's a few stories of St Andrews.
So this church played an important part to the people of the town?
Yes, it was a focal point for the community, really, churches, as they are today in most villages. But in the Civil War, it was very prominent during the time it was the war years went on.
So what would have been around the close outside of this place, this area where we are today? What would we see if we walked out the exit? Would we see fields? Would we see houses?
Yeah, fields, a few houses at Old Town Street. You might be able to see some of the inner line forts, the town line, the inner line of forts. If you looked up the hill, you might have towards Old Town, Tavistock Road, you could have seen the Magdalen Fort going up there. It was a higher hill in those days. The fort, North Hill, was very high. Leading up from Tavistock Road, it was taken off after the war, years after the war, to use to fill in the creeks, Lipson Creek there. So it was a much higher hill in those days.
So it was a complete unobstructed landscape?
I wouldn't say that unobstructed, because there's houses, properties went up. There were buildings, but you didn't have to walk far to be out in the country in Plymouth in those days.
Thank you very much.
That's all right.